Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. Just waiting a few minutes as people are still coming in the room. I'd like to acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands and where I'm calling from today, and particularly the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanic peoples on whose historical relationship with the land continue to this day. Many of us are meeting in this virtual space from locations outside of Victoria and across the world, so I'd like to also acknowledge the lands on which you live and work. Please note that this session is being recorded, and I also invite you to use the speaker view if you'd like to see the speakers more fully, which is located in the top right corner of the Zoom function. So good morning. My name is Crystal Tremblay. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Victoria. And I'm joined here with my fellow co-chair, Peter Taylor, with the Institute for Development Studies based in the UK. We're so grateful for each of you joining us today for the first roundtable in a series of two. We have another one tomorrow of the Social Divide stream titled Navigating an Uncertain Future for Youth as Workers and Citizens. The global pandemic has impacted life as we know it, and we are seeing deepening social divides and a threat to our social fabric and everyday interactions. We know that youth are particularly impacted in ways that we don't fully yet understand. As nations try to tackle a growing youth employment crisis, we are seeing simultaneously erosion and tensions of their citizenship, their rights, and their access to justice. We can identify this crisis as having three important dimensions: a crisis of opportunity, leading to the high prevalence of self-employed and independent workers; a crisis of stability, because many rural and urban work activities are temporary, seasonal, and insecure; and a crisis of protection, because only a small share of the workforce, typically formal or government workers, are organized and are protected by employment law, sexual harassment policies, and social protection mechanisms. The crisis of citizenship is also a closely related aspect, which arises because young people feel excluded from civic and policy processes that concern their futures. We need urgent and targeted responses to prevent lost opportunities and further youth exclusion. So often, youth hear others speaking for them, at them, or occasionally with them, but it's important that they have opportunities to enter spaces and to create spaces where they can bring their views, experiences, and perspectives to interactions with diverse audiences. Personally, I'm passionate about and know the importance of creating these spaces so that youth feel empowered to be active agents of change in their own communities, who bring creativity, innovation, and practical solutions to many of the challenges we are facing. I see youth on the front lines fighting for justice, equality, and planetary health all over the world, and they are a strong mobilizing force. We need to engage youth on what they need to be supported and empowered, and that they are included in decision-making processes that affect their lives. We need to hear youth speak themselves about these challenges and how they want to shape the future, their future, your future. Our vision for today is to create an engaging space for us all to have this important dialogue. And we'll be breaking up into smaller breakout rooms shortly following our panelists, and I'll provide some more information about that. Peter and I are so thrilled to welcome three very inspiring speakers with us today: Zara Chodry, Sage Lacerte, and Nikita Rakiani, to share their ideas, thoughts, and lived experience on the topic of youth, work, and citizenship. We are so grateful for their leadership in helping us frame these discussions today. Regrettably, Tarika Tandon, one of our speakers, could not be with us today, but I'd like to acknowledge her contributions to planning this session. So to introduce our speakers, Zara Chodry is a Muslim Canadian youth focused on youth engagement, newcomer and immigrant involvement, and event planning. She immigrated from Pakistan and is currently studying biology and psychology at the University of Victoria. She has been involved in Fresh Voices and was awarded the Cross-Cultural Dialogue Award, involved in the initiation of Akita's Speaking Rights platform, and a previous member of the City of Victoria's Youth Council. She is the Youth and Sports Director of the local mosque, a member of Vancouver Foundation's Level Advisory, and Vice President of UVic's Muslim Student Association. As Project Manager of Youth and Events at the Inclusion Project, she is the lead on youth engagement priorities, including youth-informed frameworks for racial, gender, and climate equity, intergenerational partnerships, and capacity development. Sage Lacerte is carrier from the Lake Babine Nation and has served as the founder and CEO of the Sage Initiative since 2019. The Sage Initiative is the first Indigenous women's impact investment collective that will generate a circular economy by facilitating the flow of capital from Indigenous women investors to Indigenous social enterprises. Between 2018 and 2020, Sage has served as the National Youth Ambassador of the Moose Hike Campaign Development Society, a grassroots movement of Indigenous and non-Indigenous men and boys that works to end violence against women and children in Canada, with a particular focus on post-secondary initiatives. Sage holds a degree from the University of Victoria in Gender Studies and has been informed by Indigenous knowledge from all her relations across Turtle Island and beyond. Nikita Rakiani is a program officer with the Society of Participatory Research in Asia, also known as PRIA, based in New Delhi, India. She currently supports various programs at PRIA that focus on building youth leadership and capacities. She is a certified participatory trainer with experience of conducting trainings and programs with young people, a postgraduate in development communication and extension. Nikita has also conducted primary research with women in rural settings of India. I'm so grateful for the three of you to be with us today, and I'll now invite Zara to start us off.
All right, thank you so much, Crystal. So again, my name is Zara. I'm joining you today as an uninvited guest on ancestral and ceded Coachellist territory of the Lekwungen people, also known as the Esquimalt and Songhees Nations and the WSÁNEĆ Nations. And as Crystal mentioned, this is Victoria. For me. So obviously we're here gathered in dialogue as we, as cliche as it sounds, navigate a new world together through this pandemic. It's clear the disproportionate impact of COVID on Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, and youth. The mental health impacts are evidently clear, anxiety, depression, and suicide. There's a wave of unemployment, isolation, death of loved ones. We're also navigating an infodemic with bombardment of negative news bias and fake news. Youth, like myself, are struggling to find meaning to go to school when there's such uncertainty globally. The determinants of our mental health and overall stability doesn't just end with the discussion on the COVID pandemic. If you really dig deeper into the roots, youth are dealing with so much more, such as persistent climate anxiety and eco-paralysis with climate change. Youth are navigating socioeconomic status as we lose our jobs, which leads to instability in housing and healthcare. There was and still is a growing obsession, if we all know from early on, of like coffee and COVID glow-ups on TikTok. And that really does fuel internalized fat phobia and diet culture. This might seem like an over-analysis of how we're dealing with things, but we have to move past shallow level of depth in the conversations that we're having when we're discussing youth and all the narratives that come into play. We can look to the current election in America and see that the impacts on their citizens doesn't just impact them, but also worldwide, and see that BIPOC, gender diverse, and other marginalized communities dealing with political fatigue and trauma We see voter suppression fueling minority disenfranchisement nationwide. And when we decide to solve youth problems, a simple way is to fix their immediate problems like mental health that we can physically see and unemployment. However, these are really treating symptoms and it's not treating the root cause. But also, if you start to analyze it a little bit deeper, there is no singular root cause to all of these. They're so intertwined and so intersected that you can't discuss one without really talking about the other. Many ignore this reality and usually are overwhelmed when you have to try to take on something so intersectional. So organizations, institutions, and structures set their agenda by engaging in consulting with youth on their problems, asking for solutions to these visible problems, and then filtering it through filtering policy and action through their institutional colonial lens. So in this way, we're constantly looking at symptoms, gathering statistical backings, and then focusing on the next symptom with another consulting and engagement phase. What we truly need to understand is that another quote that might sound really silly, but what you do for us without us is not for us. So we need to understand that there's an underlying layer of a savior complex, and to be explicitly clear, a white savior complex. Youth, like any other community, know their issues best and their needs. We're not going to be beneficiaries of programming anymore. It's 2020. We need positions of power. We see improvements when young people decide that enough is enough. Today's youth have moved past the individualistic narrative of a need for a job, a house, and stability. We know that if we want a better future for ourselves, we need to shape it for everyone else around us. We need power to explicitly challenge rather than reproduce structural inequalities and dismantle them to advance our collective liberation and ecological survival. The Black Lives Matter movement, rising to the forefront, as we all like to bring about, was led by Black youth who questioned police institutions, prison systems, education systems, fighting for abolishment and reform of them. These youths are asking for something very simple when you look at the issues, but they're painted as radical and extreme. When we talk about empowering youth, we're leading into a narrative of this binary of radical versus conforming. Empowerment and innovation are really seen as positive that we use in our terminology when talking about youth from a top-down level. But radicalization is always seen as negative in this sector. So as youth, we need to really reclaim both terminology and reframe the negative connotation of radical change as a necessary condition for addressing these systemic issues. There needs to be a systemic shift to cultivate a society built on raising youth to recognize their autonomy and agency. And this is built through leadership, not just the tokenized leadership of attending conferences and summits and having fancy things to add to a resume. We really need to expand to the various lived experiences of youth and their grounded expertise as leaders of climate justice, family leaders providing and supporting for their loved ones, youth leadership for Indigenous sovereignty. If we want solutions-oriented action, it can't be filtered or a narrow response. We can't expect a youth engagement or youth mental health policy to change our lives as they stand. We need integration of work-life balance policies. We need police reform and abolishment. We need investments into community and education. We need universal living wages, social safety net policies. We need a strengthened healthcare system. I'll leave you with another cliche of youth being the bridge to today and tomorrow, always talked about as the leaders of tomorrow. But youth, in their essence, are the ones shouldering the burdens of tomorrow. And when we start to think about these things and talk about actions, a lot of the way that we talk about it is alleviating that burden from their shoulders and trying to lessen more. But if we shift that thinking and try to imagine it that we're lifting it from their shoulders and into their hands, that's a narrative that can help us move past shallow conversations that aren't getting anywhere and having consistent conversations that are just repeating a cycle of these consulting and engagement phases, and just building in this cyclic process. So I'll leave it there. So thank you again for giving me the space to discuss, and I'm excited to share and discuss with everyone more as we go into the breakout rooms.
Thank you so much, Zara, for your opening thoughts and very inspiring experiences on this topic. And I think you really set the stage for really transforming the system and how things are done in authentic ways. So thank you for that. I think that will percolate throughout our discussions today. I'd love to invite Sage Lacerte, to share some thoughts with us.
Thank you, Crystal. Hadi, Sage Lacerte Sadney, Loretta Madam Slew, Paul Lacerte Spa, Tebe Snachalya, Lukwangin Keo, Saikana Lashabu, Yinka Dene. So if you don't speak the carrier dialect, then I said my name is Sage. My mom is in the spirit world and her name is Loretta Madam. My dad is Paul Lacerte. I'm very lucky to be a carrier person living on the territory of the Lekwungen speaking people in what is now colonially known as British Columbia, Canada. I'm a member of the Bear Clan, and there are a lot of people who have given me a lot of these teachings, which I'm very grateful for. I want to echo many similar thoughts to what Zara was mentioning. I think there's like some of the scaries. I'll give you some, I don't even know, Thursday scaries, and then I'll talk about some other stuff. We're faced with rising unemployment. As Zara said, disrupted education, and further disadvantages for vulnerable groups. Immediate attention will be required to prepare young people to earn and thrive during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. We all know certain technical skills required for most sectors quickly become outdated. So due to rapid changes in like technology and because the widespread of like automation, by the time a teacher or engineer, computer scientist, economist is complete their degree, their studies, that knowledge is already behind. So we're in this changing environment calls for a transformation in how we think about learning and what is our most valued forms of learning and knowledge keeping as individuals, communities, as nations. But it's such a challenging feat because our people are in pain. Youth, young people are experiencing deep pain as a result of COVID. We've lost many lives. And depression, stress, anxiety among youth are the most common psychological ailments during COVID, according to a Kenyan-based report by Youth Cafe. The report further states that COVID-19 has created uncertainties about the future of young people, of our young ones, our future. And so government measures to control the spread of the pandemic, such as lockdowns and quarantining, have led to massive job losses. But they've also contributed to two major factors that have impacted various forms of violence, including domestic violence and gender-based violence. These two things are economic downturn, and the second is social isolation. So those things paired together contribute to rates of gender-based violence being greatly increased during COVID-19. Amid self-isolation, women, racialized groups, newcomer communities, non-binary folks, young people are exposed to pre-existing forms of violence and also new forms of violence, including going back home or living in risky living conditions as a result of COVID. So in the Canadian context, Minister of Women and Gender Equality, Miriam Monsef, has said that COVID-19 is empowering perpetrators of violence, as abuse rates have risen so significantly. So when I was thinking about what to talk about today, I was trying to think about what the ailment is. What's the ailment? Is it fear? Is it loneliness? I'm pretty lonely. This is a very lonely world. Is it uncertainty? And I also question what the medicine is. I question what it is that we can do to ease these uncertainties for youth and allow us to feel grounded moving forward, even if it's just like within ourselves as individuals. And so my teachings tell me that to care for oneself is to care for your mental, physical, and spiritual well-being, not just a physical, wear a mask, wash your hands kind of thing. We have to care for ourselves in these ways, and we need the support to do it. The support is like the bigger kind of underlying part. So having the support to do these practices in community, like I'll give some examples, like community care. If you have a roommate or somebody who's in your bubble, to make agreements about community care that can help your physical and your mental and your spiritual well-being. For example, like exchanging dinners once a week. You make that person dinner and then you do all the dishes. And that is one thing that they can rely on, that there is a certainty that they can rely on. Second example is practicing ceremony, being able to turn to a place of worship or to whatever form of prayer or spiritual practice that you have. I use smudging just to kind of have my own small ceremony and to be able to speak with my ancestors and find power in the collective from them. And when the medicine speaks, when you allow the medicine to speak, it says that we are not powerless. It says that we have power within ourselves to be able to get past this. And we have historically, time and time again, we've gotten through smallpox. We've gotten through very major movements in the world that have caused many lives to be lost. But it also shows that we have a common obligation to move forward. We also have a common obligation to achieve gender equality. I really want to kind of bring this conversation into a space that promotes gender equality in all fields of life. And the impacts of global crises are never gender neutral, and COVID-19 is no exception. So there's so much opportunity for innovation, although women have, during economic crisis, women and girls, and racialized women and girls in particular, are most significantly impacted during these crises because we earn less, because we have fewer savings, because we often rely more on, we have less access to social protections, and because we are disproportionately more in the informal economy, care work and things like this, things that can contribute to the wage gap. And so economic growth and gendered representation have been growing only to be disrupted. by COVID-19. Come on. So the solution-oriented part of this, directly for the policymakers and the Canadian Senate, who I know is a part of this conversation, is to support and create policies to enable young women to participate in our economy during and post-COVID. This means in the Canadian context, as Zara said, supporting BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and own businesses, particularly social enterprises, who will contribute to a healthier community. One small note that I have is that this forum is promoting civic engagement and is calling on the struggle to sustain our democracy. And I'd like to offer a reminder that we, as young people, have shown up in a really unique form of civic engagement through mass mobilizations, through peaceful protesting, and through online advocacy to preserve our rights. So we've been doing this for a long time. American context, the American election, in Canada, the Mi'kmaq fishery dispute. We're going to call it dispute and not racism, outward racism. And as Zara mentioned, Black Lives Matter movement. Within the last few months, we've seen a rise in policing. We've seen a rise in digital surveillance, racism, domestic violence. But COVID-19 cannot prevent anti-racism from happening. It cannot prevent forms of activism and generating and manifesting mass support. So I think what I want is for people to be able to understand that although it feels like there's so much disconnection and there's so much uncertainty, this is the time for young people to develop skills and rapidly learn and adapt and practice resiliency. And resilience is not an inherent trait. We can't treat it as an inherent trait. And so we must learn and radically pioneer as young people. And it's important to remember and to remind yourself and to celebrate yourself and say that we practice resilience every day by studying, working, being with our family. And for many of us who have been so lucky to have survived this far. And I want to just put out my hands and say Masi Cho for everyone who's willing to come today and who's willing to listen and engage with this particular worldview and few teachings that I was willing to share. So thank you, Crystal, for the introduction as well. Masi.
Mr. Cho, Sage, thank you so much for sharing all of that wisdom with us. It's so important to bringing in these gender lens that you so eloquently spoke to, and thinking more about Zara, also getting really to the root of these problems that are so intertwined and interconnected. So I'd love to invite Nikita, as we keep moving. We only have so much time together, and I really want to get into some discussion. So I'm really excited, Nikita, to pass the talking stick to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So just today, Tarika was supposed to present, but due to some tragedy, she was not able to join the discussion. So I will be talking. So just a brief introduction. I am Nikita, and it's a pleasure to be part of these discussions. And I couldn't agree more. And with Zara and Sage and whatever you've said, these are something that are not just specific to Canadian youth, but these are some of the issues which we've seen, that young people from the world, across the world, are facing these issues. So this is something that all of us together need to work upon. So just a brief overview. I am Nikita, and I work with Participatory Research in Asia, which is a 39-year-old organization, a civil society organization. And can you see my screen? Perfect. Okay. So Priya's work is focused on empowerment of the excluded through capacity building, knowledge building, and policy advocacy. And whatever initiatives we undertake are undertaken with the overall perspective of making democracy work for all, be it in political systems, be it democratic culture in families, communities, social, societal spaces, and participative democracy with active citizenship. So in today's discussion, I will be giving a short narrative of what Indian youth have to say. And whatever I'll be saying today is what I've heard, what I've known from them and learned from them. So this is not something that I am saying on my own, but this is something that I've learned from them. So India is one of the world's youngest democracy, and it's the youngest nation with half of its population below the age group of 25 years of age. And I've been working extensively with young people for almost 2 years now, using different contemporary mediums like art, poetry, music, drama, theater, social media, debates, and recently through webinars, through live sessions, through podcasts. And I've heard and I've talked to them regarding their experiences, perspectives, about their concerns, and about their ideas of a democratic nation. A nation which respects different perspectives, different voices and expressions. So there were a lot of issues which I came across and which I explored while having engagement with them. So in India, in educational institution, you will find diverse lot of young people who are coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds, who speak different languages, have different political opinions, follow different religious practice and cultural practices, have different ethnic backgrounds. And these diverse group of young people have similar and dissimilar issues and concerns. But some of the issues which are pretty much common everywhere, I guess, and which we also came across were intolerance, lack of spaces to have conversations. There were a lot of identity issues related to job opportunities, issues related to, to put forward their point of views, to be part of policies which were made for them. So it was so weird to see that youth policies are being made in India, and I think across the world, but young people were never part of the execution, never part of the implementation, never part of the planning of those policies. So these were some of the issues which we came across. And through these issues, we learned that young people coming from marginalized sections were more vulnerable towards these issues. And COVID-19 pandemic, the pandemic actually recreated and re-highlighted all these issues and made the, situation worse for them. So, So when we talked to them, these were some of the issues, if you can see on the screen. So these were some of the issues which we came across, and COVID-19 made the situation worse for them. So like Zara and Sage mentioned, that there was shift in academic calendars, uncertainty related to future, shift in sources of learning, loss of jobs. And in India, maximum number of young people were losing jobs because A, they were not experienced and they were easy to lay off, and B, they were not able to find new jobs because they were not experienced. So this whole vicious circle was going on, and still we're not able to find jobs. And all this was also increasing different mental health issues. This also led to different domestic violence cases at homes, especially among especially young girls were facing those issues. But we also saw a lot of young people dealing with it, coming out of various solutions. And these solutions ranged from retaliating, from protesting, from coming out. And there were a lot of things which were happening across the world, which, gave us a hope that, yes, young people can do something. Young people have the potential, have the courage to do something. So a lot of young people learn new skills so that they can so they can get employable. They try to use mediums like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook to disseminate correct information about health and hygiene. They try to take the responsibility to fight against fake news. They try to create an environment where people were having conversations about mental health, people were having conversations about gender, people were having conversations about LGBT community rights. They were trying to create these spaces, and this was not just in India, this was all across the world. That we saw the protest of Black Lives Matter. We saw various protests in India happening against a rape, which we recently saw in news. And these are some of the issues where we saw that young people were coming out and gave us a lot of hope that yes, we hold a lot of power, we have capacities to advocate, we have capacities to stand for what is right. And in spite that we're not involved in policy processes, decision-making processes, we stepped ahead and stood for what was right. But towards the end, it is also very important to channelize these capacities in a more structured, in an order that we achieve inclusive and equitable socioeconomic development. It's important to create spaces for young people who can express themselves democratically, get involved in social change processes. And it's actually our responsibilities as coming from academic institutions, as coming from various civil society organizations, to create those spaces. And even as young people who are studying in different colleges, to create spaces for people, for our classmates to express their opinions, to share, to be themselves. So one of the things that really worked for us at Priya was a fellowship program which we implemented. So this fellowship program came from the insights of young people, and it was divided into 4 modules where fellows understood about themselves, who they were, understood about their identity and other identities, understood about their issues, and then learned about how different aspects of society work, like power, intersectionality, gender, how power plays a role, how stakeholder works, how community is mapped, how participatory research is conducted. And, they were coming from their locality, as one of the presenters mentioned, that young people know what are the local solutions. So they planned those solutions and implemented those projects. So this was this really worked for us, and maybe I thought that we can, something which can be done across the world. If we create those spaces where young people can talk about, where there's an environment to learn, where they learn those skills which help them in negotiating, not just in their families, but also at workplaces, in front of their friends, at the educational spaces. So after engaging with them, we learned that, this model was really working, and it helped them to create a safe environment at home, to have conversations of identity, to have conversations on gender, to have conversations on tolerance, and to realize that democracy is not just about voting. It's about tolerance. It's about acceptance of different views. It's about keeping your opinion. It's about learning new things and making a difference out of it. And I think it's very, very important that we as young people take those responsibility and be supportive of each other, learn about ourselves, bring change from where we are, and then take it forward. And I'm sure that all of us are pretty much capable, pretty much aware, and we know what is right and what is wrong. It's just that we need to create safe spaces for all of us to take it forward. So yes, that's all from my side.
Thank you so much, Nikita, for sharing. And it's so great to hear what's happening in India on the ground. I know you work very closely to communities across, intersectionally. So it's really great you're here to share some thoughts from India. And pointing to some of those solutions that you're talking about. I think in each of your talks really spoke very loudly to that. And I'm excited now to have some more in-depth conversations. I hope each of our speakers inspired us to think a little bit deeper about this topic. And I would now invite us to go into a breakout room. So I'm going to facilitate that for the remainder of our session. And you'll see in the chat, I've added a link to Jamboard. So if you're not familiar, Jamboard is a kind of an interactive site I've used for teaching and learning in my classes. It's a way to engage. So I'd invite you each to click on that and open a new browser. And in the, let me just pull mine up. In the browser, you'll see different slides depending on which group you're in. So if you're in group 1, you'll see the panel for group 1. And then if you click the next frame, you can go to group 2, and so on. So I think, given that we're only 17 participants, I think what I'll do is make 3 breakout rooms. So we'll just have 3 groups, which is great, because then we'll have a little bit more time once we come back to have some more deeper discussions about this. So within the Jamboards, you'll see there are 3 questions that we would like to think about, talk about. So once you're in your breakout room, there'll be one of us, either one of our speakers or Peter and I will be there to help facilitate and make sure we hear from everybody on these ideas, on these questions, that we can then bring this all together and share this more widely. So I'm going to initiate the breakout rooms now. And we'll be in there for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll come back just to have a close. Great. I think we're all back now. Hopefully we had some good discussions in the breakout room. Nice to see some new faces joining too, so thank you for joining with your videos. We have about 13 minutes left together, and so what I thought I could do is share my screen, and then I'll bring up the Jamboard, and in the remaining few minutes we can just maybe go through each of the groups and just hear a few highlights. Let me see if I can. Okay, and I think group 1 and 2 we're using the same board, which is awesome. Let's see here. Maybe we'll start with group 1, which was my group. And I was with Sage, Zara, and Christina. Lots of really good ideas came out of our discussions. Took lots of notes. We kind of focused on number 2. We thought that was kind of an exciting question to look at. Some of the ideas just in terms of youth being able to build community at this time, which is so challenging for many because of the online space. Also, how youth can be better supported both at the university, having better support for academic concessions, or just a greater understanding of the different ways that youth are impacted for their studies. But also the burden that youth play or take on because they are being active and standing up for causes like climate, like Black Lives Matter, like racism, all the different ways that youth are really taking leadership, often at a cost to the youth, whether that's missing school, whether that's missing work. So that was one of the kind of key points that came up, to be really framing how we, look ways to support youth in that. Just looking at a few other, in terms of kind of more policy, we talked a little about, we are partnered with the Senate, so we do have an opportunity to share our ideas that have come out of today with the Senate. Both Peter and I will be pulling these ideas together in proceedings, and also a chance to feedback some of these. So I like the idea of having some kind of policy related, but they don't all have to be that focused. One of the suggestions, I think, from Christina in my group was to have better feedback mechanisms. So if policies, or I think Zara actually was saying this, in terms of youth building policies, to really have kind of authentic feedback mechanisms for youth to hold accountability. So I guess those were a few. There's quite a few more. So I invite Sage, Zara, or Christina, if there's anything really kind of key that I didn't mention, please chime in. Otherwise, I guess we can move to group 2. I think we're using the same slide. So is there a volunteer from group 2 who might want to share a few ideas?
Were we group 2? I actually forgot which group we were.
Let's see.
But I was using the same slide that you have here, so we definitely didn't switch to another slide.
Thank you, Yamila. You are group 2. I was just
Okay.
It's on group 3.
Okay, that was me. I was like, why is somebody else changing? I was like, okay, I see why. So the major things that came here was that, okay. So a lot of around mental health. So that was a big thing, especially for racialized youth, and understanding that a lot of the systems that have been put in place right now haven't been created with certain communities in mind, not really pointing out the exclusivity aspect of that. But I think a lot of the Western way of thinking really bases it on science and facts. And there's things you can't just research. There's things you can't observe simply because of we don't have those ways of measuring impact in many cases. Something really important that came out was as well that in groups, even let's say Africa, where we have communities that have even been more impacted from the history of resource extraction, plus COVID, plus so many other things, you have very bright people, but they need the opportunities, and they literally are not seeing those placed in front of them. And I think we can create connections between that and other communities that are just been continuously pushed away from the mainstream media as well. And so I think that we need to fight. There's a few things here. There's the single story. When you think about Africa, what do you imagine and what we think about the people that are there? I think the media really pushes the story of poverty and lack and the need for help, but there has to be a separate story that's being pushed, which is the one that, yes, there's people that are pushing and that are educating their communities and their families and that are creating amazing things, but they really don't have access or even the attention to take those ideas and work further. And so one of the things we thought about, well, what if we were to really foster more global collaborations and partnerships? And what's really important is that if we were to do something like this, we need to create a new framework that looks at human relations from a holistic perspective. I think that's the problem with the way policies have been made thus far, where they only look at one part of the equation and then forget to take into account the intersectional aspects and points of, looking at things from a gender-based lens, for example. Some of you know, I'm a huge advocate for entrepreneurship. And so when I brought that lens into it, and I think about women, especially racialized, indigenous, Black women as well, I realized that there needs to be separate policies that, again, are looking at this holistic perspective where culture is valued, where spiritualism and the different diversities that we bring to a table is not about even creating a separate space, but it's about adapting the spaces that are already out there. Because really, breaking down a whole system, it's going to take quite a long time. But what can we change within our current systems that are more inclusive and that include more worldviews than the predominant Western perspective?
Thanks so much, Yamila. That was really great feedback, really great ideas.
Thank you.
And so we'll move to our group 3. Is any volunteer? There's lots of sticky notes, so I know you're all talking a lot.
Well, I'd love to invite one of our colleagues from that third group, because I just jumped into using the Jamboard because I had just have a practice with it just before. But I think it would be really great if Nikita or Kajal or Kayla would like to share some reflections.
Is it okay if I do it?
Please do.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. So I guess we sort of, given the two of us work at the same institution and with, in terms of participatory research and development, we sort of took our worldview into how we thought about these things. And Kayla, given her background at IDS, we were kind of on the same wavelength, I think. So in terms of opportunity and protection, we sort of took into account that not every young person comes from the same space economically. So, and especially in India, ours is a very young country. So youth aren't just, facing individual tensions, but they are often breadwinners in families. They are raising children. Young people are raising children, and therefore how this pandemic has affected their capability to be providers. Then, and many young people don't have financial cushions. Then, in terms of electoral participation, young people may not want to participate in democratic processes of voting because of the health risks. You didn't see that in the US, but you did see that on a small scale in India, where state level elections were conducted recently. Uncertainty around work opportunities. We all have personal stories, how some of us have either lost jobs or are looking for new jobs, but the opportunities are not up to what we were expecting to find. Access to basic services, stuff that in a developing country you can't even take for granted in a good situation, and during a time of stress where the state capacity is extremely stressed in the pandemic situation, how people who depend on government provided services may not have access to them, especially young people. And it's very challenging for newly graduated young people. The roadblocks to getting started while still getting experience are really present, especially in a time of crisis when organizations want people who can get started and start delivering on the fly. So learning is not as much of a priority. Then what do youth need to thrive in a changing world? So safe spaces, whether it's in academic institutions, whether it's in actual just society-wide. Then sort of went into what actually is a youth issue. In really young countries, every issue is a youth issue. And youth need to be involved. Topics that focus on youth and youth concerns shouldn't just be focused on in the academic realm, but acknowledge that youth have active stakes in all aspects of governance. And youth voices need to be included in all levels of participation. In some growing economies, if you're beginning to engage with youth, going beyond the urban, because urban areas is typically where youth engagement begins. What happens in rural areas? What happens and in rural areas where the demographic may be younger, the workforce may be younger? What happens there? How do youth get engaged there? And diversity, background, ethnicity, experience, and location is crucial when you're looking to create deliberative spaces. And then the medium of engagement, how do you make sure that the medium of engagement is determined by the youth themselves, depending on their sort of origin factor versus, being determined by an external agent, how youth can retain agency in these discussions. And we spent a lot of time here, so we didn't really get down to number 3. We didn't have enough time. There was 10 seconds left, so we kind of threw one thing. Networking is one thing that we've all been doing as a sort of way to navigate this pandemic and to try and ensure a future of work. But I think the other two groups have covered this aspect more comprehensively than we have.
Thank you so much. Is it Yoshi?
Yeah, Joshi, yes. Kajal, yeah.
Yeah. I think we've met in India when I was there, possibly.
No, I'm new. I'm like 3 months into Priya, so that's not happening.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that really good overview. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, so we can all come back to a gallery view. So it's exactly noon. I'm grateful we managed to get through. I was a little worried about making sure we had enough time to do that. So I'm so grateful for all of your time today. And co-chair had some final remarks or not, but I'll just leave it open. But just a very heartfelt thank to Sage and Zara and Tarika, Nikita, sorry, for opening us off today. And sharing your thoughts, and to all of you as well. So I don't know, Peter, if you had any final words.
Well, I heard some really inspiring things today, and for me, this is a learning opportunity. It was a chance to really hear these views, and I absolutely agree. Our speakers, Sarah, Sage, and Nikita, were really inspiring. One of you said, "What you do for us is without us. I'll keep that with me because I think that's so important. It's so easy to imagine that we have solutions for others. And the big focus of the Victoria Forum is talking about solutions. But who's generating the solutions, and who's also even describing what the challenges to which those solutions are actually intended to be? And I think, in the group that I was just in with Kayla and Kajal and Nikita, we were talking about spaces. How do those spaces emerge where people really own them and can use the vehicles which enable them to tap into their experience? And I think that's another thing that I really take away from this, is that we do have spaces like this. We're all spending a lot of time on Zoom, but this is a fraction of the variety of possible spaces where we can engage. And these kinds of media are great because they allow us to come together, and we have friends here from different countries of the world, which is fantastic and would be difficult to do actually if this just depended on us being physically together. So that opens up possibilities. But it's also channeling the way that we interact through certain vehicles which speak well to the experience of some, but perhaps not to others. So I think there's lots of opportunities for us to think what creating inclusive, diverse spaces really can look like, and what that requires to open those possibilities where we can have more of these discussions. That's something I would like to take back, Crystal, when we go into the forum. And bring some of these ideas more widely. And also, I hope to have an opportunity to continue this conversation with those who are here. Thank you to all. Really inspiring.
Thank you, everyone, so much. And I wish you a safe and well end of your day, and to be in touch again soon. Thank you.